Okay, guys, we are back with the Beatrice prophecy. We are at chapter 19. You will go with Jack Dory, said Brother Edict. When he landed or handed Beatrice the satchel, you will write down the words this man says. Yes, she said. She took the bag from him. It was heavy in her hands, and then I will come back to you. We do not know what will happen next, said Brother Edict. Only follow Jack Dory, do as he says, and do not speak. Truly, Beatrice, it is better if you pretend to be mute. Beatrice nodded. I will write this man's confession. I will be as silent can be, and then when I am done with his words, I will write something better. I will write the story of your mermaid. How do you mean? Said Brother Edict. I mean that I will tell the story of her bejeweled tail and her beautiful face, and I will tell what became of her. She had meant to cheer him up, but he was crying. Brother Edict, she said, do you not want the story of your mermaid? Yes, he said. He wiped his eyes. I do. Then I promise I will tell it to you when I return. She looked into his sad eye, the crooked one, the eye that would not be still. She loved that eye. It seemed to her that it was an eye much better suited than any regular eye for observing the crooked or off-kiltered world they all inhabited. Brother Edict smiled at her. She knew that he did not want to smile, but he smiled for her. We will find each other, she said. Yes, Beatrice, he said. We will find each other. They were three: Jack, Dory, Beatrice, and a goat. Jack Dory did cartwheels as he walked down the road. He followed the cartwheels with several handsprings. You cannot do this, can you? He said, calling back to Beatrice. I cannot do it because I must walk along and pretend to be a monk, said Beatrice. The satchel was slung across her chest. It bumped against her hip as she walked, and her heart felt heavy. But the goat did not seem worried, and Swellica ran to Jack Dory, kicking up her heels and shaking her head. And then she ran back again and walked at a set pace beside Beatrice. Jack Dory started to whistle a jaunty song, and Beatrice looked down at the goat. She said, I think he pretends to be happy. I think that deep inside he is sad. Those he loves are dead. He is alone in the world. And Swellica looked at her, listening. I'm not afraid, Beatrice said to the goat. I will not be afraid. And Swellica nodded. She bumped her head against Beatrice's leg. Beatrice took hold of her. I'm not afraid at all, said Beatrice again. Okay. Chapter 20. But she was afraid. It was so very dark in the room at the end. This is the creature who will write my confession. Have you brought me the tiniest monk in the world? Said the soldier. He was in the bed, the covers pulled up to his chin. His face was red and dotted with sweat and pustules. His hands trembled. Why, it does not even look large enough to be a person. Perhaps it is nothing but a robe that you have arranged in the shape of a monk to trip my failing eyes, my failing heart. The world is going dark, and you bring me a tiny monk. I have brought you what you asked for, a monk who will write exactly what you say, said Jack Dory. You will not say what size monk I should. You did not say what size monk I should bring. Speak you, said the soldier to Beatrice. This monk is mute, said Jack Dory. I smell goat, said the soldier. You are imagining things, said Jack Dory. Never mind, it does not matter. Nothing matters. Leave, boy. And you, tiny little monk, do not look at me. Turn your eyes away from me. Beatrice lowered her head. She had no desire to look at the man in any case. He was so angry, and he smelled horrible, and the whole room stank as if it concealed something dead. She closed her eyes. She thought of good things, sweet things. She thought of Brother Antoine's maple candy. She thought of the great golden bee that Brother Edict had made for her. She thought of Brother Edict's mermaid, and the jewels that were strewn through her hair and encrusted upon her tail. She thought of sunlight streaming through the small window of the room at the monastery. She thought of Answelica butting Jack Dory so that he flew through the air. She thought about... Excuse me. She thought of the surprised look on Jack Dory's face. Yes, that was a lovely thing to think upon. She put out her hand, and there was the goat next to her. Her bony head was solid and warm as stone on the summer afternoon. Beatrice opened her eyes. I will go now, said Jack Dory. Stay. Please stay, she wanted to say to him. but she did not say it. Instead, she nodded, and Jack Dory nodded at her in return. And then he leaned close, and in a very quick voice, he said one word to her, Beatryce. Only that one word, her name. It was as if he were reminding her who she was. And then he was gone, and it was just Beatryce and the soldier and Answellica in a dark room in the upper story of an inn in a village beside a dark wood, not far from a monastery, near a castle where a counselor spoke to a king. Soldiers have been sent out across the land, sire. It is only a matter of time until she is found. Do you remember, said the king? We could... When you came to me and took me to the monastery and showed me the prophecy as it is written in the great book. I do, said the counselor. Wondrous day, said the king. I was lost and wandering. I do not know I would ever have dreamed that such words of prophecy have been written about me. I thought that I would lead an unremarkable life, but instead I am in the seat of power, in the certain hand of fate. It is so, said the counselor. Those words were written about me. Will you now say them? The counselor cleared his throat. The youngest son of the youngest son will, against all odds, ascend to the throne. Yes, said the king in a voice filled with wonder, against all odds, and that was me. It was, and it did come to pass with some assistance, because we must act to make our fate come true, said the king. Yes, sire. As I have said, the prophecies are to be headed, and we are also to act upon them. We will find this girl. Okay, chapter 21. Beatryce held herself straighter. She made herself look right at the soldier. Look away from me, he said, and Swellica walked closer to the bed. Her hoofs sounded an ominous rhythm on the wooden floor. What is that? Said the man. What evil approaches me? The goat put her face right at the face of the soldier, and he screamed. Demon! He shouted. Beatryce stifled a laugh. She opened the satchel and retrieved the parchment and spread it out on the floor. There was no table. She lit the candle, she readied the ink, and Answellica leaned over and snuffled Beatryce's shoulder. She stuck her head in the satchel and made a noise of delight. The smell of maple rose into the room. Beatryce pushed the goat aside. She felt in the bag and found a small maple person. Nestled next to it were a leaf and a star. She smiled. Oh, brother Edict. The soldier sat up. Now, he said, will I speak now? Beatryce said nothing. I smell goat, said the man. He laid back down, but who cares? The smell of goat is nothing compared to the terrible stench of the angel, and so I will confess. The room was silent then, and even with the light from the candle too dark, the darkness and silence felt familiar to Beatryce. It was the same as the abyss, that terrible place of not remembering. She felt that emptiness in her back, pushing against her, breathing against her neck. I will not go, she told herself. I will stay here. She put out her hand and touched Answellica, and it was as if she had cast an anchor for herself into the dark and fast-moving river. Beatryce steadied. She stayed. I will begin, shouted the man, and I will say it, and you will write it, and it will be done. Beatryce bent her head to the parchment. This man would do what he had to do. He would say what he had to say, and she, too, would do what she had to do. She would write it down, and then she and Answellica would go back to the world, back to Jack Dory and Brother Edict, to the sunlight in the fields. The soldier cleared his throat. From outside there came a sound of bird song, a single note, high and bright. After a long pause, the bird called out again, and then it sang a song of happiness and sadness, lightness and darkness. And what kind of bird can it be? What kind of bird sang such a complicated, heartbroken, and beautiful song? Beatryce raised her head. She listened, and then she understood. It was Jack Dory. Her heart flooded with light, and he wanted her to know that he was there close by, and that she was not alone. She smiled, and it made a great deal of sense to her that Jack Dory would pretend to be a bird. He moved through the world with such a lightness. She remembered again him saying her name before he left the room. Beatryce. I am Beatryce, she whispered to herself. She put a piece of maple candy in her mouth. The sweetness of it blossomed inside of her. I have killed, said the man, and with those 3 words all thoughts of birds and songs and sweetness went out of Beatryce's head. Her heart felt heavy, filled with dread. How many have I killed, said the man. I do not know. Write down that I have taken life after life, too many lives to count. There are wars, and I fought in them as a soldier should, as a soldier must. And then there were those killings that I did at the king's request, specifically the king's request, and I did it all without regret. Yes, without regret. Beatryce felt the room tip sideways and then right inside itself. She dropped the quill and reached for Answelica's ear. "Are you writing it down?" shouted the man. "Write it down." But she did not write it down. She did not want to write it down. Who would want to write such terrible words? "Write it," shouted the soldier. Beatrice let go of the goat's ear, and she picked up the quill and she dipped it in the pot of ink. She wrote, "I have killed." Her hand trembled. "I regret almost none of it," said the soldier. "I regret the children. That is surely what the angel once recorded. I regret the children." Beatrice looked up and she held herself very still. "Two boys and a girl. I killed them. Write that down." But Beatrice could not write. She could not move. Some paralysis afflicted her, and she stared into the candle flame and saw a creature curled and glowing. "What is it?" "A seahorse." "A horse of the sea." "Seahorse, seahorse, horse of the sea." And then suddenly the creature was trembling through the darkness away from her. Beatrice put her hands over her eyes. She lowered her head to the floor. The man was crying now, loud, ragged sobs. Answelica butted Beatrice very gently, and Beatrice lifted her head and took her hands from her eyes and saw the goat. "Here," the goat seemed to say. "Here, stay here." And then the soldier said, "Under this bed is the sword. It is the sword that did the deed. I cannot get it clean. It will not come clean." These words seemed to come from very far away. Answelica butted her head against Beatrice again. "Stay, stay here." And Beatrice remembered that she had promised Brother Edict she would tell the story of the mermaid. The mermaid. Beatrice bent again on the parchment. She crossed out the words, "I have killed." She wrote, "There was once a mermaid."